Welcome to this special edition of the Chicago Lead. I'm Brooke Fletcher alongside David Haugh. In big news from the Chicago Blackhawks on Thursday. Today, they announced they are parting ways with their head coach Luke Richardson. And David, just kind of your initial thoughts here in the news.
Chicago sports, another firing. Boy, second in a week. Matt Eberflus with the Bears, now Luke Richardson. Season 3, it was winning time. The Hawks just weren't winning enough. They were very active in free agency, investing over $50 million, bringing in some veterans. This was a different mission this season for Luke Richardson. Last 2 seasons, we understood what the mission was. Develop young players, get Connor Bedard going. Connor Bedard's struggles this year did not help matters, but the Hawks were not winning often enough, so Luke Richardson suffers. It cost him his job, and now they're moving on.
Only 8 wins out of the 26 games they've played so far this season. And someone who broke the news, that is Frank Seravalli, our NHL insider. And he joins us now. Frank, why now? Why did they decide to part ways with Luke now?
Really, I think the simple answer is not enough progression from the Blackhawks this year. And it was, I think, a lot centered around Connor Bedard and the constant frustration that seemed to exist in his game, but also for the team as a whole. I did pre and post last night for the game, and one of the things that we talked about after the game was just how disjointed the Hawks looked. Not enough sustained pressure in the offensive zone, not a lot happening, too many one-and-done plays, and then in their own end, a team that didn't defend cohesively enough. So when you talk about bringing in free agents and increased expectations and this team taking a step forward this season, well, you know, Connor Bedard, yes, had more support, but when you arrive at a point where Taylor Hall, a former Hart Trophy winner, is a healthy scratch by surprise, and Tyler Bertuzzi, a workhorse, a pest, a guy that's difficult to play against, doesn't have the goods so far this year, and Teuvo Teravainen starts the season hot, but his game had fallen off a cliff the last 15 or 20 or so, it wasn't all coming together. The pieces weren't fitting together. And a lot of times when that happens, it ends up being the coach paying the price, which is a difficult spot. I'm sure a tough pill for Luke Richardson to swallow. When you think back to last season and the season prior, a coach brought in to help guide a team through a rebuild. Well, last year, in a lot of odd ways, with all the injuries that they had, the Hawks had actually exceeded expectations last year. He overachieved with the roster that was put in front of him. This year, a better roster and the same results, which can happen.
Frank, so Connor Bedard obviously struggled. He went 12 games without a goal. When he scored it, you saw the relief on his face. We all know his struggles. And I wonder, when you look at the way that he started this season, Luke Richardson tried every conceivable combination. It's seen moving lines. They tried him on the wing. They tried a lot of different things. Which was the case? Did all of the changes contribute to Connor Bedard struggling, or did Connor Bedard struggling create the need to be as desperate as it seemed that Luke Richardson was at times?
I tend to lean more towards the latter. When you're constantly trying to find a new solution, sometimes, part of the problem is the guy that you're trying to find the solution around. And not to say that Connor Bedard has been a problem or anything like that. He wants it so bad. His intensity is so sky high that I think sometimes when you see the frustration that's apparent in his game, at times he's probably been his own worst enemy this season. But I think to have another year in which Connor Bedard, to play out this final 3 quarters of the season and have him be this frustrated without any results, any success to point to, really without something to look forward to, that was probably one of the big things that was weighing on the Chicago Blackhawks here, saying, this is our franchise player. This is a guy that we believe deeply in, to the point where he was probably penciled into Team Canada's lineup at some point this summer based on his rookie season, and in some ways probably played his way off of the Four Nations roster, that you have to sit back and evaluate all your options.
Well, you mentioned that they were just not meeting expectations, and GM Kyle Davidson, he actually had some words to say about that preseason, just about how this season has to be different.
There needs to be a progression. I don't know how many points or standing slots that is, but we can't finish second last in the league.
So, Frank, they can't finish second to last in the league. They are last in the league. And I think the different expectations this year, we all understood that. Typically, around the league, 26 games in, is this too early, do you think, to pull the plug on a guy who really did the job according to the way it was described and what was asked of him in the first 2 seasons? Do you think the Hawks are acting prematurely here?
No, I don't, because I think by a quarter of the way into the season, you have a really good sense of what you have, but perhaps more importantly, what you don't have in the NHL. Things tend to crystallize in a big way. And it's not that this season and the results were predicated on where the Blackhawks finish in the standings. It had to be something that you could point to and say, okay, we're seeing meaningful, significant progress here. And not only had we not seen progress, but in a lot of ways had seen some regression from varying points in this team. And the tough part about it from a Luke Richardson perspective is that this Hawks team really got through the month of October. And if you really go back and look at some of their results, were kind of unlucky in a lot of ways with their expected goals for that they had, the way that they had been defending. A lot of numbers seem to point in a direction that this team was playing better, but wasn't getting the results. Then you shifted to the month of November, and it's been almost an absolute disaster to this point. So many disjointed parts of this team, not connected play at both ends of the ice, and a team that really, I think, had gotten lost. And that's one of the big things that I was, kind of watching and keeping an eye on with someone like Connor Bedard. He felt, and it looked like he's been lost watching him over the last couple weeks, and doesn't really know where to turn next. And I think now perhaps having a new coach, a new voice there in Anders Sorensen can help provide perhaps a different way forward.
Yeah, Sorensen, he's the AHL affiliate in Rockford. He's going to take over as the interim coach here. What can you tell us about Sorensen, Frank?
Well, for one, he's kind of making history in some ways in that he's going to be just the third European-born and trained head coach in NHL history. You take a look at his resume here. The Hawks were actually the first team in the year 2000 with Alpo Suonen to be the first team to hire a European-born and trained coach. That only lasted 1 year. There has only been one since or in between, Ivan Halinka in Pittsburgh. So Sorensen is charting some basically tilling up some new ground here for the Hawks. And what we've seen from him in Rockford is not just someone that has gotten along with everyone really well and is really well liked and is thought of as a sort of rising star, even though he's 49 years old. The Hawks think that he has a bright future and someone that, although he has the interim tag today, will be given every opportunity to earn the full-time role. He's also proven that he can develop talent, because you think about some of the prospects that have been in Rockford as that organization has continued to grow over the last few years. Despite having, a lot of different guys in and out of the lineup, and at times the Hawks using more guys than they probably wanted to from their Rockford team in the NHL last season, he's had a winning record and a track record of developing players, pushing them toward the NHL that I think the Hawks really want to grab onto.
So, Frank, you look around the league, though. Boston fires Jim Montgomery. He gets scooped up by the Blues, and they move on, and the Bruins do as well. I just wonder how you compare other situations with what the Hawks are doing. It sounds like Sorensen's going to get the chance to finish the job or finish the season and maybe put himself in a position to be the permanent head coach in a market like Chicago with an organization like the Blackhawks. Does that surprise you? Does it surprise you that they're not maybe looking outside at who might be candidates, guys with experience?
Well, I think the first thing was, in making a decision like this today, you want to make sure that things are settled for right now. I don't think they've really spent a lot of time thinking forward yet of what that might look like, other names that they might want to talk to as the process goes on. But as mentioned, they're really big believers in Sorensen and what he can do, and they want to see what this looks like over the last course of the season to see if he can be that guy for them without having to look externally. So I'd imagine that he's going to have a pretty long runway here. And when it comes to considering the coaching market as a whole, it's not the National Hockey League that it stands for coaches. It's not here for long. And that's really the case when you consider, just past 3 seasons or into the final season of his deal that Luke Richardson had with the Blackhawks. You're thinking that he's a guy that the way that he stepped into the role, the presence that he has, the different things that are available to him in his arsenal, he's going to be someone that might be here for the long haul to maybe be that one coach that could go from a team that is rebuilding and be the coach, the more permanent fixture. And that just hasn't been the case.
Frank, we talked about in the offseason, the Hawks invested about $50 million, more than that, in veterans coming in to try to assimilate a good team that could be more competitive. And then they bring up the coach from Rockford, Sorensen, who has coached now Frankie Nazar and Korchinski at Rockford. And I wonder, how do they balance that? And do you think that Sorensen getting the job for the rest of the season paves the way for maybe a quicker path to Chicago for Frankie Nazar and maybe bringing Korchinski back and making him part of this mix?
I wouldn't draw any lines from one to the other just yet. And the Hawks as a whole management team have been keeping a close eye on everyone in Rockford, including Frank Nazar, and are hugely impressed with the season that he's had to this point. It's not just that he's been good on a game-to-game basis. He's been consistently excellent from start to finish this year and is among the very league leaders so far for Rockford. That said, in a perfect world, I think the Hawks have eyes on keeping Nazar and Korchinski in Rockford for as long as they possibly can. Their thought process is we'd much rather have these guys be overripe than have to go backwards back to the AHL again at some point for more seasoning. So they're trying to keep a cautious path in terms of not getting overexcited with some of the results that we're seeing on a night-to-night basis, more thinking of what the overall body of work looks like. And so they're excited for that. But again, it's hard to say that with any definitive notion that, hey, we're going to put a stamp on the table and say, Frank Nazar, you're not coming up till there are 2 months left in the season. You never know what things look like with injuries and such. So, but again, in a perfect world, they probably keep those guys down there quite a bit longer.
Well, and firing a head coach in the middle of the season is never easy, but GM Kyle Davidson obviously had to make the decision on what was best for the Blackhawks. He just released a statement saying, quote, "Today I made the difficult decision to move on from Luke as our head coach. We thank him for his efforts and contributions to the organization and our community. As we have begun to take steps forward in our rebuilding process, we felt that the results did not match our expectations for a higher level of execution this season and ultimately came to the decision that a change was necessary. We wish Luke and his family all the best moving forward."
This is a good job, Frank. This is a really good job, whether it's Sorensen who keeps it or somebody else they go out and seek, because Kyle Davidson has accumulated a lot of talent with good drafts. And you look at the free agents that they added to the mix: Tyler Bertuzzi, who hasn't had a good start here in Chicago; Teuvo Teravainen, who hasn't been as good as he was in Carolina either. But there is talent here. So I would think from the outside looking in, you look at the accumulated draft picks, you look at the free agents that they've got here, this has got to be an appealing job, whether it's Sorensen or somebody else long term.
I couldn't agree with you more, and it's for a whole host of reasons. One, this is an Original Six franchise that does it right and treats its people right. They've got outside-the-box thinkers leading their management group that are willing to try and do different things. And then you have the Connor Bedard effect. It's like gravity. You bring people in that want to be part of that. They want to be part of the solution to help this team be on the rise. I think back to Edmonton and all the decade of darkness that they had with their team and the proud history that they have. It took someone like Connor McDavid going there in the draft lottery to really open up some eyes for new people in management on their bench and their coaching staff. And they haven't always gotten it right. And this development path, this rebuild is going to come in fits and starts. Development in the NHL, it's extremely hard to do. It's not linear. And that said, though, with all the other draft picks and capital that the Hawks have acquired and accumulated to this point, I'm looking at a ton of guys that are playing college hockey, that are playing juniors, that they're looking forward to saying, hey, these are going to be huge parts of the Chicago Blackhawks moving forward, that I'd have to think that this rises right to the top of any sort of opportunity. You may not be able to win today, but if you're the right guy who can put this team on the right path, not only are you going to have a job for a long time in the NHL, but you could be part of something very, very special.
Well, and a part of the future of the franchise is Connor Bedard here, and you'd imagine a top priority is just to get him out of the slump that he's in here. We know the talent that he has. How much say do you think he's going to have on this coaching decision, Frank?
None. I think Connor Bedard, first off, would shun the idea of that being a possibility. He's someone that is, for as much as the superstardom that's, surrounded him, he's someone that really just wants to put his head down and work. He's a grinder. He puts the time in, whether it's on the ice, off the ice. They can't get him to leave the facility most times to just go home and take a break, take your mind off of hockey and do something else, find something else to keep you busy. And so all of that said, he's someone that I think just wants to play and wants to win. He's hungry to be better each and every day. And regardless of who's coaching him, I'm sure there's a certain affinity for Luke Richardson and his sort of warm personality and how he's been able to get guys to really kind of buy into what he's been up to. That I think that part has been probably left an impression on him. But now the exciting part, if you're Bedard and anyone else in that Blackhawks locker room, as much as you're disappointed today in seeing a good man walk out the door, the next part is you get a chance to try things a little bit differently. You get a new voice, a new look. It's a different outlook that the Blackhawks are going to be coming to the rink to on Friday.
We also now have heard from Blackhawks owner Danny Wirtz, who issued a statement as well as Kyle Davidson issued a statement. And on behalf of the entire Blackhawk organization, I'd like to thank Luke for his dedication over the past 3 seasons. I fully support Kyle's decision in making this change as he continues to do what is needed to move our team forward. I have the utmost confidence in him and the rest of our hockey operations team as they begin their search for the next head coach of the Chicago Blackhawks. That's from Chairman and CEO Danny Wirtz. So, Frank, when you look at the Blackhawks, when you look at this season, the adjustment to expectations, what's realistic for this team, which is dead last now in the NHL? Where has the bar been set?
I think, and I predicted this before the season started, I said the Blackhawks would have a 15 to 20 point improvement this season. And that sounds wild to say now looking at the results, but I still think that an improvement in that range is still possible. This team only has an upward trajectory to grow. I think if you can get some of the shackles off Bedard from the frustration that he's been feeling, that perhaps that confidence will inspire not just him, but rub off on everyone else around the team with increased production from him. And when you think about some of the offseason additions that have been made, we know that a lot of these were on a temporary sort of stopgap basis. You're here for 1 year or maybe 2 years if you're lucky. Tyler Bertuzzi is the rare exception here that was signed to a sort of longer term deal. A lot of these pieces are going to be moving in and out, and that chessboard is going to be constantly changing. Those guys were brought in here to be pillars of support that the rest of this franchise could stand on to kind of bridge them to what the next generation of players is going to be like with Rinzel and Moore, and, you know, go down through the list, Korchinski, all these guys that they've got coming up through the ranks, that they're taking their time, making sure that no one's being pressed into situations where they're being asked to play above their heads like a lot of guys were last year. That if you see some of that success, which should breed some confidence in all those guys throughout the lineup, that I'm still bullish on the Hawks this year, taking a bigger step forward over these last 65 games or so to be a markedly improved team. It's in there. It's within them. Someone needs to just do a better job of pulling it out of them.
Yeah, and, you know, we've seen it not just here, but, you know, we saw it with the Bears. And the question was, how is this team going to react? How is it going to impact a locker room? In your opinion, where do you think this team is going to go?
I think you're going to have a lot of veterans that might feel like they are responsible for getting Luke Richardson fired and maybe feel the responsibility to play better than they have to this point, because this isn't a team like the last 2 seasons. Frank, I think you might agree. That was more of a developmental, as we talked about, mission. This is a bunch of veterans who came here, they wanted to mesh together, and they didn't mesh together. And I don't know, because we're not inside the dressing room, I don't know if it's a cliche to say Luke Richardson lost this team. I don't know if that's accurate or not. It just seemed like a team that wasn't performing up to capability, whether it was offensively with guys like Bertuzzi and Tavo, or defensively where things started to fall apart and unravel. I think just overall, this was an underachieving Blackhawk team full of veterans who probably weren't as good as advertised.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think you even just look at a game like Wednesday night, for instance, against the Boston Bruins, right out of the gate, 6 block shots in the first 9 minutes. This isn't a team that quit and rolled over and gave up. The work ethic was always there. The fight was there. And I think that's probably what made this decision all the more difficult for Kyle Davidson and his staff. It's not like this team suddenly just, you know, everything that Luke Richardson was saying fell on deaf ears. I think, to me, a lot of this came down to structure and style of play. And when you see a team that, as mentioned, has been as disjointed in both ends of the ice, too many one and done situations on the offensive end, you know, situations where, you know, it's attention to detail, little things, awareness, that when you see the mistake happen once or twice, you say, okay, there's a lot of young players on this team and they're continuing to learn. We can chalk it up to that. But when you see the same mistakes being made over and over again, I'll give you just a little thing that I noticed in the game against the Bruins on Wednesday night. We were thinking, when are they going to make the goalie pull here? When is Peter Mrazek going to get the hook and go to the bench? And it seemed like at some point that he actually pulled himself from the game, and everyone on the bench seemed surprised when he got there because the Hawks are down 2 goals and they're trying to press and score. And yet, for whatever reason, the coaching staff didn't make the decision to pull the goalie. It was just a tiny little detail in the game that you watch back and you think okay, is everyone on the same page here? Are they all rowing the boat at the same time to get the Blackhawks to where they needed to be? And I was just seeing some of those little details that seemed to be off. And again, a 1 to 2 week stretch, it's okay for some details to be off. It's an 82-game season. But when you start to see them compile and over again the same things, that's when it adds up to be something bigger in an environment that I think you want to try and avoid if you're the Blackhawks, where you're setting a new bar, a higher expectation.
Where do you feel like priority number 1 should be for Sorensen? Because you could go in a lot of different directions here. For a young coach, you could be a little overwhelmed. What do you think priority number 1 should be?
It might be overgeneralizing, Frank and Brooke, but I think that you've got to unlock Connor Bedard. Everything about this franchise is centered around a 19-year-old with extraordinary talent, and he's not met expectations. I think that's one thing that whatever Sorensen can do, surrounding with the same line, whatever it is, keep him in the same spot. Try to unlock that potential because it is so enormous.
I agree, and I would say that all you have to do is look to San Jose and Macklin Celebrini, the more recent number 1 overall pick. And I think there's a big difference for me, not just in terms of how they've been able to impact the game this season, because Celebrini has been fantastic. But if you watch Celebrini's play, a lot of it comes back to a joy and a smile that I just haven't seen in Bedard. And if you could take some of the weight off of his shoulders, he puts so much on himself. If you're Sorensen and your staff, the first thing that you're going to sit down and try and do is figure out what puts him in the best position to succeed and make him feel comfortable and to get some of those shackles off that you're talking about to allow him to go out there and produce. I think there was so much of Bedard's game last year where he struggled defensively that he's worried about doing more and more of that this year. I think you have to put that aside and say, just get back to doing what makes you one of the best players in the world.
Sometimes you have to hit the reset button, right, Frank? Well, we appreciate you taking the time. Frank Seravalli, our NHL insider, giving us the latest on the Luke Richardson fire. We appreciate you taking the time. And the 4th head coaching firing here in Chicago
Teresa
since
Witherspoon,
August.
Matt Eberflus, and now today, Luke Richardson.
Where does
wow.
Yeah, it's an
holidays.
interesting time in Chicago sports. Everybody, we appreciate you stopping by. David Haugh, Brooke Fletcher.